Come on. We are active. Hello, everyone. This is Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, forgive me. I'm somewhat stopped up today. You can probably see it. Hello, everyone. This is Jamal Thomas. And that means we are live. I have Jordan Chariton with me tonight. Jordan, please, I've already introduced you, but please introduce yourself to the Soapbox crowd and say hello to the crowd.
I am a progressive journalist, a Virgo, and a fan of your show. I think that nuance is not in big supply on the internet, and I've enjoyed watching you.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I came across you, I think like most, through TYT politics. Or let me say it this way, through TYT, then it transitioned into TYT politics. Let me ask you this. What do you consider to be your biggest contribution to TYT politics? And I know that's somewhat of an odd question, but I'm trying to separate the wheat from the chaff. What part of it is TYT? What part of it is you? If that makes sense.
The money was certainly TYT. I certainly didn't have the money to go around the country. So yeah, for that I was very grateful. A lot of that money came from viewers too. So really grateful. To be honest, since I was their first reporter, a lot of it was me, because it was kind of a wild, wild west type thing. Like, it's not like Jank was calling me every day to be like, I want you to go here and say this, don't say this, cover this. He did give me a certain amount of autonomy, particularly in my first year. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, just by the TYT name and the brand, that helped a lot in the stories I was covering, credibility, getting interviews, having people trust me in the field. But yeah, I mean, definitely, I think TYT politics was kind of, I really had a vision to just feature people. I know it sounds simple, but it's not done anywhere else. So I would say definitely the resources were certainly TYT, and for the most part, what you saw was kind of my ideas.
Your vision, essentially, the vision of the channel was you. The reason why I asked that, I look at what TYT politics was then versus what it is now. And you can see a clear distinction between the two, meaning after Jordan, you call it, AJ, if you want to call it that way, where first focus on Flint, for the most part, vanish. Like these smaller stories that deal with community issues somewhat vanished. Detroit, Flint, Flint, Michigan is Detroit. But you know what I mean? It's like, it seems to be your vision of the show focused on issues that weren't necessarily brought up in the typical light. And the moment that you left, it seems like the focus on those issues kind of went wayward. It seems like there is a distinct vision that you had that was enacted on the show that I don't necessarily see them there now. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Or am I wrong on that? Do you think that's a little bit wayward? Do you think it was purely just the money and, a few? Or did you have your clear stamp on, this is what I wanted this to be, and for all intents and purposes, I was left to my devices to make it this way? And now that I've left, it's somewhat gone wayward from that idea. Jordan, are you there? Paging Jordan? Come back to me, Jordan. Come back to me. Okay. Jordan will be back. I am putting my mental processes to make this case that Jordan will be back. And when he gets back, I'm trying to make a very big point. Come on, Jordan. Come back to me. He'll be back. There you are.
Is that you or me? Oh.
No, that was you. That was you.
My bad.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Did you have a question? I guess what I'm getting at, just in case you missed the question, I was getting to the point of, when I look at TYT politics now, there does seem to be this stamp that you put on TYT politics, that you had a very specific vision of TYT politics. And it does seem like that it goes beyond just, yes, the money. The money is great. But let's say for the moment that it was Bob Barker instead of Jordan Chariton. Bob Barker would have also gotten the money, but Bob Barker would have had a completely different show than what Jordan Chariton ended up having. I'm asking, did Jordan Chariton himself have, is there a distinction between what TYT politics was with Jordan Chariton as opposed to what it was after Jordan Chariton? Does it make sense? The focus of the show seems to be different. You focusing on Detroit, Michigan. You focusing on the riots. What's his name? You getting locked up or getting arrested at one of the riots, if I'm not mistaken. That's different. That's not the same thing. It seems like the show is, the tenor of the show is different before you. I'm sorry, not before you, because there was no before you, but the tenor of the show with you there was somewhat different than what TYT politics is. And this is trending into kind of what I also want to get into before getting into the other stuff with, it seems like the direction that TYT has taken. And it's a direction that not just me, that other people have noticed and other people have called attention to. So,
yeah, I think that in total honesty, I haven't been watching it the last few weeks, so
fair enough.
I don't know if something changed.
And mind you, by the way, this is not taking a shot at the people who were there. What's her name? I love what's her name. I can't think of her name right now. It's dropping it's dropping away from me. But the woman who used to work side by side with you, love her content. I think she's perfectly okay. I think she has Emma. Yeah, Emma Vigeland. That's it. I think she. It was funny. There was this conversation between you and Emma that was talking about Elizabeth Warren, and Emma was a little bit more on the side of Warren on this in a way that I wasn't necessarily on the side of Warren. But I take her as being earnest. I like Emma. But nobody is going to Flint, Michigan. Let's say it that way. Let's put it that way. Nobody is necessarily going to Dapple. You know what I mean? Like, it's clearly, you had a clear vision of that show. And I would make the point that the vision of the show that was articulated when you were there was effectively you. Once you went away, that vision kind of went away with it.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of things there. First off, I think, obviously, if in any company, if you have a reporter running a channel or running a show and that reporter or host leaves, it's probably going to be a little bit different. You know, I mean, that's just the reality. I think that while I was there, you know, without getting into so many specifics, I did have disagreements with Cenk, because I think, you know, he definitely wanted to focus on a lot more of the Trump stuff and a lot more of the national stuff. And my kind of basic DNA is to go cover the stuff that created Trump in the first place. Because I think, you know, there's this notion now, especially in corporate media, that, you know, everything was just dandy on January 19th, 2017. And it just suddenly everything fell to hell. And I know that's not true because of the Young Turks, because I got out there. I mean, I was like many, kind of in my New York bubble before I joined the Young Turks. I learned a lot in the field. Yeah. So I do think from the top down, you know, there's more of a focus on kind of Trump. I know that he wanted me to do a lot more Trump than I was comfortable with. I remember specifically, not Cenk, but a manager there. I was doing a story on Flint, and he wanted me to try to connect it to Trump's EPA. And when I kept saying this happened under Obama, and, you know, it's not gotten better under Trump, but there's no real connection, you know, that wasn't sticking. So to answer the bottom line, you know, at the end of the day, like I said, I got a lot of autonomy that first year at TYT Politics, and it's essentially run, I don't know, but I would assume it's run more by Cenk now and those things, and it will be their vision and his vision.
That's fair. That's extraordinarily fair. There's an interview where Ed Schultz had a conversation talking about MSNBC forcing him, like pushing him, not to cover Bernie Sanders. Literally saying on the opening night that Bernie Sanders was going to give his opening speech, that Ed Schultz was there, as Schultz was friend with Sanders. They were going to open with this, and his manager calls him and says, stop. Go to some story that nobody wants to talk about, nobody's even interested in, and do not cover Sanders. Ed Schultz goes further to speculate that the reason why he was fired was because of his support of Sanders. I often charge that TYT is MSNBC light. The idea that they're forcing you or trying to push you to cover a story that they know is not true, that Donald Trump, come on, this was under Obama, the whole Flint thing. I mean, it's laughable that they were trying to get you to cover something like that. I looked at a thread. I was watching a thread on Twitter, and one of the people worked at TYT on that thread. And the person was kind of making this point like, yeah, it's gone in a bad way. And the people on the thread weren't angry. I mean, they weren't mean or vicious. They weren't some of the people who were like TYT, needs to burn in hell or nothing like that. They were viewers. They were like me. There were people who, during the Bernie thing, ended up watching TYT avidly. And somewhere along the way, when Cenk comes out and says, vote Hillary, check, please. That was when they said, check, please. And immediately after that, it seems like it went off this cliff of everything is just Trump in Russia, and Trump is the worst thing on the planet, and everything revolves around Trump. What do you think of the Trump and Russia thing? Are you on this Trump and Russia thing? Because if so, we're going to have an argument. But are you on this Trump and Russia bandwagon of Donald Trump being the worst thing on the planet, and the cliff, though the world fell off a cliff when Donald Trump took office in January?
No, I'm not. I think a few things. Number one, Donald Trump, he's obviously, a bad guy. He's a bad president. I don't like his policies. I actually personally am a little more scared of Mike Pence because he's a radical, competent man. He's competent. I think under Pence, you'd have a lot more things that actually pass by now. I actually think you'd have Obamacare completely repealed if Mike Pence were president.
I keep saying this. I'm glad you agree with it. I keep saying the same thing. It's like one guy's a goofball that didn't even know that he was supposed to have a ground game when he was running in politics. When he was running it during the primary. He doesn't know squat. He's incompetent. Right. People hate his guts. Right. And because they hate it, I gave you a perfect example. John McCain, there was a bill that John McCain ended up being one of the main votes to put a knife in a bill dealing with environmental change, climate change. And it was a bill that would have essentially been worse for climate change. It was repealing some Obamacare regulation. McCain put the knife in the bill. McCain didn't put the knife in the bill because he loved, Obamacare regulation or Obama's regulations. He did it because he hated Trump. Right. Like if Pence was in that office, I think he would have sailed through like nobody's business. They hate Trump. He's incompetent. And because he's incompetent, he puts almost like a gum in the works in regards to how things get done. I agree with you on this. I fully agree with you.
I also think, I've said from day one, even when I was at TYT, I don't have a problem if there's an investigation. God bless you. Do an investigation. If Trump's campaign actually coordinated with the Russian government to hack emails or whatever, great, find it and we can deal with it then. My issue is really what we've seen for 2 years, particularly on corporate media, and frankly, in a large way on TYT, has been speculation and mass hysteria over unproven facts. And what bothers me, and I had this debate when I was at TYT, myself, Michael Tracy, were on a panel with Cenk. I said, there's this guy called David Brock, and he's got this thing called Correct the Record, and they're paid trolls online that disseminate misinformation. You have 120, actually it came out that it was 200,000 voters purged in New York City during the election. I don't recall the corporate media or Arizona, the fact that the corporate media called the Iowa caucus when Bernie was down less than 1/10 of a point. You had deceptive and sometimes just straight out lies mailers going out in California. I mean, I could go on. So this real focus on Russia and what they did, rather than the fact that our complete system from primary day to what leads up to primary day, that is more impactful if you want to talk about interference. Because to me, the only thing that's been proven is there were some fake Facebook pages from Russia. I don't know who it was from. And by the way, I did an interview with Matt Taibbi on my podcast. He was there in Russia during the 96 election. The United States actually literally interfered in their election in way worse ways. So I think there's been a real loss of perspective, and some of it, frankly, is clicks. I mean, there's no other way to say it. Some of it is for clicks.
Okay, fair enough. You think it's for clicks. I think it's more cynical. Maybe I'm more cynical than you are on this. I'm more cynical on this. I'm a hell of a lot more cynical on this. I think this is one of those things of we need to attack Trump. We hate Donald Trump. Donald Trump is horrible. Whether people are being useful idiots from the standpoint of, I've used TYT as useful idiots on this. I honestly don't think they're in the room. That being said, they have told a particular line. And this line has been going from CNN. CNN has lost all objectivity. Objectivity is out the window. For the network who claims to be the name of news, they have lost objectivity. MSNBC, Fox News does what Fox News does in a weird way that Fox News does it. But it has been so bizarre. It's like you're living in this red menace era when there isn't a red menace. And yet they foment this stuff like nobody's business. It's amazing.
I think that to me, as far as the Young Turks and more broadly, just media in general, I think it's more specific and people don't see it this way. But, you know, sometimes if you're a journalist or even just a person, the very people and ideas you criticize, without even realizing it, you pick up some of those tendencies. Yeah. So, for example, you know, the Young Turks and Cenk specifically really, and again, this isn't, I'm not attacking him. This is just what I said, what I feel. Mm-hmm. They really, Cenk always was going after those New York and DC journalists who kind of are in their little bubble. You know, they never get out into the country. They just deal with kind of the hamster wheel of news of the day. And I actually, and I'm not telling you anything I didn't tell him when we had some interesting conversations. Sometimes when you're on the coast, you know, in LA, and really your consumption of news, you're just like surfing the Huffington Post and Raw Story and all these things, you kind of can get into your own little bubble too of what's important. And, you know, you might think it's super important to lead your show with something awful Trump tweeted or something awful, you know, corruption in his administration, when you're not, you're kind of, you know, you really don't realize, wow, they just shut the water pods in Flint and are lying to the people that the water's safe. Or another black man was just murdered in Sacramento. That's already off the news. And all these stories that I'm very passionate about and I think we need more of. So I think that it's more that it manifests in Trump derangement syndrome. But I think at the end of the day, if you're a studio show on the coast and you really don't go out there, you kind of just fall into that reactionary news of the day, which let's be real. I mean, whether it's Young Turks or anything else, they have a business model that's very skewed towards YouTube and these kind of outlets. And for that, I mean, Trump in a headline works. You know, Russia in a headline works. And it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I have a horrible tendency to interrupt.
Yeah. I don't think that's the main goal there, but I do know it's a business. I actually did it the opposite way at TYT Politics. My friends actually yelled at me, "You're covering Hillary too much. You should be covering Trump." I'm like, if I covered Trump 24/7, this channel would blow up even more than it did. Yeah. But I don't want to do that. I want to cover other things. So I think it's kind of a cognitive dissonance. You know, they aren't as connected as they should be to what's actually happening in the country. And that's part of why on November 8th, election night, these anchors on CNN and MSNBC sat stunned. How did this happen?
How did this happen?
Well, if you would have actually went and talked to voters like I did and some other reporters did, you would know. And I think that's a little bit of what you're seeing at TYT. I just think it's gotten a little disconnected because, you know, they, for the most part, are not out there. They're really just reacting to, I think they're reacting to the news they find in the corporate media with like slightly more edge to it.
Yeah. And that's the way I've always taken, not always taken it. That's the way I've taken it as it's been doing recently. And I think that's problematic. Like we already have an MSNBC. Like it's almost like having feistier Democrats. It's like, but do you really need feistier Democrats? I've made this case that if you bitch, moan, rail against Democrats and everything else in the way that you go about your affairs, that's what TYT does. They're, you know, angry at Democrats. Oh, we need to do something different. We're angry. Democrats need to be this particular way. They need to move to the left, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then when it comes down to it, vote Hillary. Vote Hillary. Vote Hillary. You got to vote Hillary. And then later on, Trump and Russia. The coverage of the Democrats kind of go wayward. And then you focus more so on the things that Trump and Russia are doing with every so often hitting a Democrat. Is this the way to get change? Let's be honest. Is this really the way to get things to change? When worse come to worse, regardless of what takes place, you still end up saying vote Democrat.
Right. You know, listen, I'm not a psychologist. I always looked at it as far as what they were doing. You know, I'm a semi-privileged.
Wait. I don't mean this from a psychological standpoint. I mean this from a political standpoint.
Oh, yeah.
Meaning, do you honestly get change by doing the same things that you've always done? MSNBC will be there to tell you to vote Hillary. Fox, the mainstream newspapers have been there to tell you to vote Hillary. Hell, Comey, I would make the case, probably voted for Hillary Clinton. So TYT coming out saying vote Democrat. Is that the way to get change? Meaning, I've always called it the political, it's like the step, the abused husband syndrome or the abused wife syndrome, where it's like they beat you, they hit you, they slap you, they don't wash their hands, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you still stay with them because they say you have nowhere else to go. I'm saying that business model of you have nowhere else to go needs to be broken.
Right.
Is getting change, is getting real change from the lefty standpoint, meaning Medicare for all, school, college. I would go further to the left on this stuff, but whatever. Just that basic thing that they consider to be lefty in America is getting that by saying vote Hillary or vote for the random Democrat, whoever that random Democrat is that really going to get substantive change? I guess my charge here, and I'll move away from the TYT stuff to get to yourself because I don't want to harp on this. But I guess I'm getting at is getting real change, is actually getting things done, being complicit in saying, regardless of what the Democratic Party does, to consistently and always vote Democrat regardless, or saying at some point, no.
My answer is no. I agree with you. I think a few things. Number one, I think what TYT has had a hard time doing, and a lot of, frankly, the resistance and all this stuff, is you have to separate visceral disgust with what somebody says and how somebody acts with what is the bigger picture, right? So if I was only responding viscerally to how disgusting, vile, just used car salesman, kind of like an old school mafioso Trump is, I would think he's the biggest threat, since the Cuban Missile Crisis. But at the end of the day, because I was very fortunate to go out in the field and actually see what was happening. I kind of feel for myself that majority of people, when you're told, well, it's the lesser of two evils, and Trump will make it so much worse. The problem is the people that I met and interviewed, they can't afford the status quo. Like the status quo still leads to them in crisis. Hillary Clinton still leads to them possibly losing their home, possibly not being able to afford health care, possibly basically live like treading water. So when you constantly, as a political system and a media, make this choice between like, yeah, it's not ideal, but this guy is going to make it that much worse. If you continue that mentality, you're always going to be choosing between the lesser of two evils. And sometimes, in my opinion, and I've been criticized for this, sometimes it's got to get a lot worse before it's going to get better. Yeah. I didn't vote for Trump. I voted for Jill Stein, but I think that
come back
strikes. I hear. Yeah, but the bottom line is, do you think you'd have this progressive uprising if Hillary Clinton were president? I don't. I don't think you would have the energy you have now. I don't know if you'd have the amount of candidates running. So I do think Donald Trump's dangerous. But at the end of the day, the only way you create real change and get rid of extreme conservatism is you need to get rid of neoliberalism. Yeah. Neoliberalism is what helps elevate and pull over the line extreme conservatism. Just look at the vote on the 16 Democrats that just voted to deregulate banking. I mean, that wouldn't have happened unless you had a weak, corrupt opposition party. So to answer your question, no, you're not going to get change just saying Donald Trump is a unprecedented, unique threat, and we have to just swallow our broccoli, take corrupt Hillary Clinton, because at the end of the day, you have 8 years of Clinton, and everybody goes back to sleep. So no, I don't think that's how you create change. And I think that, frankly, I just disagree with Cenk and a lot of the hosts on that. I do think Trump's terrible. I've never endorsed Trump. When I feel like I could add something different, I covered Trump. But I don't want, I feel like there's so much more out there that actually is why so many people are hopeless and angry enough to be conned by Donald Trump. That's what I want to pursue.
Agree. No, I agree. It's almost like this understanding that you can have both. When I cover the serious stuff, it's like, yes, Assad is a bad guy it doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying took place. You can have both. Both can be true. It doesn't have to.
You know who else is a bad guy, Jamal? The Saudi prince who we just had in our White House, and that the Bushes just take the photo up. I'm sorry to mention it because Barbara Bush.
No, mention it.
I mean, the Bushes got together for a photo with him, and this. I mean, as somebody, I'm not religious, but I'm Jewish. I know about the Holocaust. I mean, what's going on in Yemen is a Holocaust, and we are enabling it. So I don't really. It's kind of hollow when I hear about Assad and Putin compared to the dictators that we have not only supported, but we've helped put into office.
Propped up. It's like our animals. The previous Bush, the supposedly smarter Bush, was calling, what is his name? The one that we took out of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, said he's an animal. He's like Hitler and all this other stuff. Forgetting the fact that he was our animal. He was our animal. He was the guy that we helped prop up and put in that spot because we didn't necessarily like the fact that those guys had, to some degree, a representative government. If they flipped out when they lost control of Iraq, and the person who took control of Iraq wanted to literally put in this kind of representative government, and they said, "What about the oil? What are we going to do with the oil?" One of the people that they propped up was Saddam Hussein, or at the very least the Ba'ath Party, Saddam Hussein being one of the main people in that party. And when he went over the line for Kuwait, they flipped out. Mm-hmm. But up until that point, that was our animal. They forget the fact. It's like they ignore our dictators, our animals, as long as they're on our side. The guy was just in the United States. He was doing the prince was jumping around from country to country doing this kind of this PR offensive in Britain and the United States. And Britain and the United States are perfectly okay with it. Then they would turn around and say, Assad is an animal, Assad is a horrible guy, Assad is a dictator, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Giving the whole Yemen thing a pass. What are you doing now? So you have extraordinarily expansive plans of what you want to do with regards to media. Could you please explain what's going to take place, or what are you trying to make take place?
Yeah, so I just announced I've incorporated a company. It's called Status Coup. So our network, once we get off the ground, is Status Coup, and really the idea behind it was simple. I think we need a coup d'état, the status quo. To be clear, a journalistic coup d'état. Keep your weapons at home, no violence. So what I'm doing in the short term now, I return to YouTube end of February. So a lot of people don't know that because YouTube's been doing some interesting things, as I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah.
So my YouTube channel is youtube.com/Jordan Chariton Reports. I've been doing a mix of, reporting and interviews with people and commentary. I'm doing podcasts every week. So I've been interviewed Rolling Stone's Matt Taibbi, interviewed candidates who are running that are progressive. I've interviewed environmental activists. So that's, I do one free a week, one for my patrons. And in the background, I mean, I'm trying to get very, I'm good at what I'm good at. I'm not good at what I'm not good at. I've been interviewing poor people for the last 2 years and struggling people. So it's not like I have this wide network of wealthy people that I could go to. So I am looking for investors, to be clear, not plutocrats that have funded the very people destroying the country. So, kind of more business owners, small business owners. I was talking to one kind woman who owns a boating company earlier today who's interested. And yeah, we're really, we have a business plan, and my vision is kind of simple, and I'm going to borrow from Bernie, like radical, but it's not, is to really create a network that goes out and covers the disappearing middle class and environmental genocide and, police brutality, corruption, state and local, all those stories that aren't sexy for corporate media, that aren't being covered even, maybe even on independent media all the time. Because I don't really, being on the road for 2 years, I've been in like 32 states and cities. There's a huge demand. There's a huge demand for real reporting and kind of putting a spotlight back on real people and real struggle. So my idea is basically, myself along with other reporters to get out there, Obviously, there's a high financial bar to meet for that. You need cameramen and reporters and travel budget and one-time equipment purchases. So I don't have any illusions. It's hard work to get this off the ground, but people could check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Jordan Chariton Reports. And yeah, my videos, I talk a lot about, what my vision is, basically to double and triple down on what I did at TYT Politics.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had finished that one. The double, triple down on what you did with TYT Politics. What is the ultimate goal, though? I mean, I know you said coup d'etat. So specifically, are you talking about a network, in which case you're bringing off multiple people? I know right now you're doing your own channel, but I know you want to expand beyond that particular channel. Are you talking about bringing on additional people onto your channel? Like, what's the ultimate goal in this?
A network or a media revolution, which is my vision. Basically, I'm looking at having, it's not going to be primarily on YouTube, because I think the days of launching a business depending on YouTube are over for many reasons.
It's terrifying, right? Just to jump into that for the moment. It is shark infested waters in regards to YouTube, only because you're attaching yourself to a company that can demonetize your video anytime they want to demonetize your video. There is no, it's a totalitarian system. It's not, I'll let you explain what you mean by that, just so people understand what you mean by that. Let's not step too far. Let's step into that for the moment.
Well, I mean,
the days of YouTube are over from the standpoint of starting a business.
I'll be totally transparent, and this isn't a pity party, but just what happened with me. I started the channel end of February. Came out first 2 weeks, we had 6,000 subscribers. So I was like, oh wow, that's really good. Speaking to my business partner, I said, let's try to buy an ad because we're growing without it. Let's try to just boost some of the videos. So like one of them was like a video about water contamination. Another one was like Jordan updates after back surgery. One was Bernie taking heat over Russiagate. They all got denied based on shocking content. I still don't understand what was shocking about any of them. I don't know if it was profanity or whatever it was, but they got denied. So on March 8th, I did a video, just freedom of speech, criticizing YouTube. I said, I mean, what literally a video, Jordan after back surgery was denied, citing shocking content. And basically, right after I did that video, I mean, everything fell off a cliff.
Wow.
Subscriber growth, cliff. Views, cliff. And I'm not really a conspiracy theorist, but I mean, I know YouTube. I ran TYT Politics. There was definitely a button pressed. I mean, there was something that happened because you don't grow so quickly and then all of a sudden it stops. And you know, I've been hearing from Jimmy Dore and Kyle Kalinske and Mike from the Humanist Report and you know, it's dangerous whether it's progressive media, conservative, batshit crazy media, whatever it is. Fascism, one of the components of fascism is censorship. And when you start censoring people, that's not a democracy. That's not freedom of speech, be judged based on their content. If YouTube or Facebook, you know, the Facebook woman, what's her name? Campbell Brown. She was at a conference recently and she said, we're going to elevate more trustworthy news. Well, who is Facebook to decide who's trustworthy and who's not? And I think you're seeing that more with YouTube. And it really hurts not just established people like Jimmy Dore. It hurts people just trying to start out. I mean, when I was at Standing Rock and many places, there's a lot of freelance journalists that are really, really good and hungry and persistent. And their platform is Facebook or YouTube. And if Facebook changes its algorithm to elevate corporate news or trustworthy news, and YouTube starts demonetizing based on ridiculous reasons, or YouTube, they don't notify people who ask for notifications, or they don't even deliver the videos to all subscribers, that is censorship. And it's, you know, you want to talk about our democracy under threat from Russia, give me a break. Our democracy is under attack from corporations and the government. So that's what I think.
Agreed. I have to be honest. There is a difficulty in doing what you're trying to do. There is a pressure against those things. So, and I'm saying this from being on this side of the desk, where covering news, Whereas certain news you cover get demonetized, certain news you cover may not necessarily get a certain amount of interest. And if what you're doing is dependent upon, either clicks or at the very least, I guess, that a YouTube algorithm of sorts, it becomes a difficult thing to do. So you have all of the, there's a certain amount of difficulty. I guess that's all I'm saying. So
that's why we're not going to do that.
Yeah, I appreciate right. Like you said, it's like I am not going to keep this purely on YouTube because the days might have been over. So agreed. Beyond your network thing, what do you think about the international politics? I don't know if you've been following the stuff that's been going on with regards to Syria, Russia, chemical attack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's your take on it? I haven't seen your videos in regards to this, so I'm asking you, just ask you. The United States has been, and the UK and France has made the decision in order to do strikes. Fair enough. They have not necessarily given any evidence for those strikes. They've just done those strikes and have asserted that those strikes were necessary and those strikes were right. Here's a question. Are those strikes legal? A, and are those strikes the best thing in order to get some solution or some solution that doesn't necessarily involve a large loss of life in Syria or a World War III in Syria, starting from Syria?
Yeah, I actually, if I'm being honest, I've mostly covered domestic stuff the last 2 years. So I've had more of an opportunity now since I'm not in the field. I've done a lot of videos on Syria, actually. I had CNN on today because I like to punish myself. And Wolf Blitzer was speaking with Rand Paul, I believe it was. And Rand Paul said the obvious.
Mind-blowing, right?
I don't see any evidence. And
I saw that.
It was so stunning to me what Wolf Blitzer said, and I think he really I think it was genuine. He said, "So you think the intelligence might be wrong?"
No, see, I always
I
always assume that they hire those guys because those guys have a point of view. It's almost like, would you hire somebody that did not have a similar point of view to you? Would you hire a conservative for your network? When you, George Chariton, are sitting down at the desk and say, I'm going to hire a reporter for my show, do you hire somebody who comes out and says, I think Donald Trump is fucking awesome? No, you hire somebody who's similar to you. When they're hiring a Wolf Blitzer or Chuck Todd, Mr. Oblivious, they're doing so because Chuck Todd is oblivious. That's what I can't come to any other conclusion on this. Either they're lying or they're incompetent, and I don't know which. And they toe the government line.
I think it's both. I think that I don't know if you know, but I used to work at MSNBC for 2 dark years of my life. I was at Fox News. The whole economic collapse when you graduate college doesn't give you a ton of choices. But anyway, what's so dangerous to me, because I was watching all of this, is I was watching the night we bombed Syria, and I was late high school, early college during Iraq. So I wasn't as active or politically inside. So this is the first time I'm really paying attention and I know a lot more. Literally, the corporate media is it's not even stenography anymore. It's public relations for U.S. intelligence. And there was just a report today. I mean, UK press, German press, French press, basically saying, well, the doctors on the ground there said the people were suffering from asthma attacks. Yeah. And there was no sign of chemical attacks. And the people that started even bringing up chemical attacks was the white helmets who came in screaming gas. And what's so troubling is the media, CNN, MSNBC, right from the gate, is supposed to be asking, can you provide us your evidence?
Yes. Like that's news to me. That's journalism to me. Like it's a journalistic thing to say, hold government accountable. Government says this. They know. They absolutely know. The United States is one of the reasons to get Assad out of seat. The UK and the United States have been giving money to terrorists. They know this. Like, this is what I mean when I say either they're incompetent or they're liars. And it's known. Despite knowing this.
I think that
go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's a mix of both, but as somebody who I've been in a lot of corporate cocktail parties, some by choice, some not. And, in life, whether you're corporate media or whatever, who you surround yourself with is who you are. And when you surround yourself by people who, to them, the holy grail is having access to these government officials and having these sources. They're not sources, they're government officials. Yeah. Those are the sources. And, you know, David Ignatius is a perfect example. The Washington Post, he's a walking talking point for the CIA. He regurgitates it. When literally you think you're breaking a story because 3 sources from the CIA tell you the same thing, you're not a journalist. That makes you a puppet. Because journalism, at its core, you have to be a cynic. You have to assume they're lying from the jump. And why I have pushed forward that I don't see any evidence from Russiagate or hacking is because there hasn't been any evidence provided. There's been a lot of conjecture, there's been a lot of speculation, and there's been a lot of Cold War reenactment. But on this, I think it's so dangerous because at the end of the day, do you really think you're going to keep bombing Syria and nothing's going to be done to the United States? Do you think that Putin is just going to like chill out there and Assad's just going to chill out there and Iran is just going to chill out there? You know, we're not dramatizing. It could produce World War III. And I think at the end of the day, it is against international law what the United States just did. Anne-Marie Slaughter, who's a think tank person, I think the New America Foundation, she put out a tweet saying, even though it's against international law, even though we don't have all the evidence, I think we did the right thing. I mean, this is the mentality.
Wow.
And you have, I really think Wolf Blitzer, Chuck Todd, it's 75% useful idiots. Actually, no, 50% useful idiots, 50% they like their money.
That's terrifying. Honestly, that's terrifying. I could listen to Chuck Todd, have a conversation, and with all the sincerity in the world, he would ask, it's as if the previous horrors that have taken place haven't taken place. So he would talk about the Iran deal, he would talk about Syria, he would talk about all these places, and all of these guys pretend as if there is no capacity for World War III. Like they talk about this purely from the perspective of the United States without taking the other perspective into account over and over. It's like all day. I saw that interview with Rand Paul that you were talking about. And I sat there and heard, and I said, and I'm screaming, I'm not even at home. Yes. Why is Rand Paul the only person who's saying this? Yes. They have no evidence. They haven't seen no evidence of this. What are they using for this? Explain this to me. And Wolf Blitzer, whoever is talking, rehabilitates the story of the United States before the end of the interview. Yeah, well, I mean, the intelligence community said this. But what Rand Paul said was just right. There was no evidence for this. Your journalistic philosophy, I'm curious. It seems that CNNs and these guys, their journalistic philosophy is to, for the most part, just jump to the belief of whatever the CIA or whatever the United States says or the government says is being relatively true and just run from that standpoint, even though they know that the government has lied in the past. You don't take that philosophy. You take the philosophy of they're lying to me. I'm starting off from jump. They're lying. Why do you take that philosophy? This is somewhat of a loaded question. Why do you take the philosophy that they're lying to me from jump? And why is that necessary for journalism? Explain to your journalistic peers. Give them a primer in journalism, a reprimer, let's say it that way, in journalism.
You know, honestly, really, my vision and my philosophy was really cemented over the last 2 years. So
he'll come back.
More Democratic Party, you know, I didn't really, you know, I didn't like some people at the corporate media, but I didn't have this visceral hatred that I do now. I mean, I don't wish death or anything, but the reason I know they're lying is because I've been out in the field. I've been to Flint, I've been to Standing Rock, I've been to Detroit, I've been to Alabama, I've been to St. Louis. I mean, I could go on, and I've seen the manifestations of government lies. I haven't been to Iraq. I haven't been to Syria, but I know my history. I've done my research. They lied. You know, for example, perfect example now, literally, Flint is something I'm very passionate about. To me, it's not just about the water poisoning. It's about the corruption and the controlled demolition of the middle class. Flint used to be like Car USA with Detroit. Flint used to be a suburban utopia. It was basically what the United States was built on in the 1950s and 60s. And for a lot of reasons, it ended up being what it is now. And you look at now, the governor of Michigan just shut down those water pods, citing that the water is restored. I've been there 9 times. I know that the water is not safe because I've investigated it. I've been trying to get a piece out on that. The corporate media won't touch it because they just believe what the EPA tells them. They just believe what state agencies tell them. So my vision is informed from being on the ground. You get more of the truth, not from pundits, not from government officials, but from people, residents, people, activists. That's a very counterintuitive way of thinking, because when I worked at MSNBC, when I wanted to invite regular people on the show, they scoffed at me, like, those regular people. But I have learned where the bodies are buried, figuratively. I have learned who's corrupt from people that live in communities. So when I hear that, you know, there was a story like Russia hacked the Vermont electrical grid and Russia hacked voting systems, but nothing happened. You have a story this week. I just did a video on it. The Pentagon saying that Russian trolls increased 2,000% after the Syria airstrikes. When they were asked, how do you measure that? They said, well, basically, we'll tell you later. So I know they're lying because it's always, well, that's classified. It's always, that's classified. We can't tell you. That's not, you know, that's for national security reasons. We can't tell you. Well, if you're going to go to war, if you're going to bomb other countries, you got to provide some proof. Because I recall in Iraq, we actually went there and the talking point, yeah, we're still technically looking for those WMDs. No. War and military is supposed to be when you are under threat of imminent attack, not because we don't like a dictator around the world. In some cases, I'm okay with intervention for humanitarian aid, but there's a difference between temporary aid and bombing nuclear armed countries. So to me, my journalistic philosophy has come from, I have been out, a lot of these places I go, Jamal, the misery and the injustice are with Democratic mayors or Democratic governors. So that's why I know they're lying, because basically I'm seeing manifested the controlled demolition of what's left of the middle class, water contamination around the country. I mean, when I was in St. Louis, it's not just the black men getting shot. They were telling me it's still basically like Jim Crow segregation there. Black people can't drive in certain areas. Black people don't get hired in downtown at businesses. So I know the government's lying because I've had the fortune of going out there and talking to people and seeing things. Now, does the government sometimes do good things? Yes. Do I think under certain leaders they would lie less, like a Bernie? Yeah, I do. But the government's lying because you don't have that income inequality chart where the money's funneling to the top for the last 40 years if they're telling you the truth. You don't spend $6 trillion over the last 2 decades if you're getting told the truth.
Fair enough. Yeah, agreed. You said visceral hatred. I often tend to believe that when people say stuff, they mean it, even though they make back stuff from it. What do you mean by visceral hatred? And I know you said, no, it's not really visceral hatred, but clearly there's something there that points to the direction of, these people get on my nerves. They anger me. What is it? What is the visceral hatred with current media, and why? Is it a big thing? Is it because you feel like they're putting a con on the American public?
My visceral hatred is very simple. When you sit on a doorstep with a mother in Flint who all her kids are sick, and she's sick and her husband's sick and the government's not doing anything for you, and I turn on the TV at the hotel and they're covering something Trump tweeted.
Yeah. That's
what it comes from. When I'm in East Chicago, Indiana, and there's a lead crisis there, and I'm sitting with a single black mother who literally had a hysterectomy at 29 after moving into this complex, and is disabled now at 40. Her kids are all sick, and the government's not doing. In a lot of cases, it's not only that the government's not doing anything; they're saying there's no problem. When I'm in Standing Rock, and literally American citizens next to me, Native Americans, environmental activists, are getting shot in the face. Rubber bullets, they could hurt.
Yeah,
they could do damage. When you see a young woman, she nearly had her arm amputated due to a grenade from the police.
Grenade. Yeah.
And the media is not covering it. I do blame the politicians, but at the end of the day, the media's job is to hold the politicians accountable. So if the media is if the media is covering for the politicians, that's where my hatred comes from, because, you know, there's kind of been this caricature of me over months that I'm some narcissist who only cares about myself, but I truly care about the people I'm covering in those communities. If I didn't, I wouldn't be going there. So that's kind of where, you know, I don't know if it's hatred or just like disgust, but I really, really, I think that these journalists, it's not just Fox News. These journalists at CNN, MSNBC, maybe when they first got into it, they had altruistic motives, but they're out of touch, and they are contributing, in my view, to people dying and people suffering, and that's where that comes from.
Agreed. Hands down. Like I was stuck watching CNN yesterday, and well, I wasn't stuck. Stuck is too strong. It was on in television. I could have changed the television. I just was too lazy to get up and change it. But I was somewhat enthralled by what I was saying. It's so disconnected. Like it's so out of touch with the life of the typical person and the things that a typical person goes through. Is so disconnected. I think the last poll on CNN when they were talking about media was abysmal. Like the American public regarded these guys as horrible. Yeah, it's fascinating to see the failure of media like this in the way they cover for political parties and what takes place in America. Corporate con job. What is corporate con job, and what is going on with corporate con job? When is it released?
Yeah, so I started when I was at Young Turks, working on my book. I probably should have written it in real time while I was out covering these stories, but I was tired after these long days. Basically, it's kind of a mix of my experience covering the campaign, covering Standing Rock, Flint, East Chicago. I did a Disappearing Middle Class tour. A lot of it's kind of the behind the scenes of what people wouldn't know happened. First chapter was, the Bernie blackout, kind of going into detail how the media took down Bernie's campaign. Yeah. Second chapter was actually, to me, the real explanation of what created Trump, which was actually not Russia, but Bill Clinton and deregulation of the media. That's what created Trump more than anything else. Chapter 3 was on me covering the Hillary Clinton campaign. And chapter 4, I think, is really important because nobody's really been talking anymore. 2016 had unprecedented election fraud. Lee Camp and some others still cover those kind of issues. So the book is kind of, I'd say, half deep dive memoir and half explaining how the corporate media works, because I've been in both. I've worked in corporate media and outside. I did something different. I wanted to just get it out, so I've been releasing it chapter by chapter online. And I believe next week, I believe we're going to be releasing the Standing Rock chapter, which I'm excited about. And yeah, I just have a Patreon for it. People could go there. You could $1, $2 a chapter, whatever. There's different levels. And yeah, that's my reporting. Patreon is patreon.com/Jordan Chariton Reports. The book one is patreon.com/Jordan Chariton.
I have two more questions. So you worked at MSNBC. Cenk and Ed Schultz have essentially said the same thing. That TYT, that MSNBC tried to force their stories, meaning we don't like you covering certain stories, and putting pressure on them to either shut up or toe a particular line. Do you think that they are so affiliated with the Democratic Party that the connections between those two things are direct, or do you think this is purely an indirect process?
The vice president of Comcast held a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton in 2015.
There you go. There you go. That's what I mean.
Chris Matthews' wife ran for Congress and is getting money from all of the Clinton circle.
It would be insane. They believe, oh God, man, they believe we're idiots. And
by the way, Jamal, I got a lot of shit today on Twitter, or yesterday, because there's all this hubbubaloo about like Sean Hannity. Is he Michael Cohen's client? Yeah. Is he not? So I just pointed out, hey, if Sean Hannity gets fired, great. I love that. I don't like Sean Hannity. That's fine. But when Chuck Todd is tweeting about the conflict of interest, well, WikiLeaks revealed Chuck Todd literally held a dinner in the honor of Hillary Clinton's communications chairwoman during the campaign. He and his wife held a dinner in her honor. Chuck Todd never disclosed that on air when he covered the Clinton campaign, when he covered the Bernie campaign. He's had her on, this communications chairwoman. So how dare I pointed out, Chuck, you're kind of a hypocrite here. And people were saying you're the king of the false equivalency. I'm like, no, two things could be true. Hannity is a premier propagandist. I think he is very dangerous in some respects. God bless if he gets fired. But I don't want to hear from Chuck Todd or any of these people because they're all conflicted.
Yeah.
I just learned Anderson Cooper interned at the CIA. I had no idea.
No shit. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh,
Cooper interned at the CIA. I mean, you see in Washington Post columns that they have a $600 million contract with Amazon. And now the Pentagon is about to give Amazon a $10 billion contract. So I think that, you know what, if MSNBC would just come out and say, listen, we are the network for the Democratic Party and the establishment, great. That's truth in advertising. If CNN would come out and say, like, we're the anti-Trump resistance, great. But I think, you know, unfortunately, because to really get electoral change, you're going to have to start to convince a lot of the older voters. And I want to be clear, there's a lot of older progressives. So it's not a criticism of older voters, but when I was on the road, I mean, Hillary Clinton's voters were generally 45 and up.
Yeah.
And the problem is, though MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, their audience is generally that older, more establishment generation. So the only way you convince those people is if they learn the truth. My parents, God bless them, they are very, very ill. They watch Fox News. They love Fox News. I don't mean ill literally. I mean, they watch Fox News. My dad's like card-carrying Trumper. When I showed them the videos from Standing Rock, when I showed them the videos from Flint, they care.
Yeah.
They just don't know. So I think that's the problem. And MSNBC is 120% an arm of the Democratic Party, and especially the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party. And when you have Comcast, who's literally responsible for ending net neutrality, and MSNBC, they don't cover it. When you have Time Warner, which owns CNN, is Hillary Clinton's 7th largest donor in her career. That was never, ever disclosed.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, it's not mind blowing because it's one of those things where it's clear. Joy Ann Reid is on. If you're on Joy Ann Reid's Twitter feed, it's very clear the side that Joy Ann Reid is on. There's no such thing as truth in advertising, and this is for all intents and purposes. That woman is in the tank, and so it's like when you hear them saying, "Yes, I work there," and they're putting pressure on me, it becomes just like. It sounds like MSNBC has a very clear dog in the hunt. Its only question is it direct or is it indirect? Is it the host or, yeah, we kind of trend towards the Democrat, or is it, no. This is the line you're going to toe if you're going to work here. I was curious about which one. That's amazing.
And I'll tell you what personally has crushed me. You know, when I started
crushed you. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, bothered me. You know, when I started getting into politics a lot, it was in the mid 2000s, and I honestly wouldn't go out drinking in college so I could watch Keith Olbermann.
Yeah, me too.
Keith Olbermann. I thought
I'm gonna say crushed is the right word. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No,
come back.
Keith Olbermann to me was the opposition and truth against an illegal war and that terrible administration. And to see him I mean, he's not at MSNBC anymore, but to see him recently on The View, apologize to George W. Bush,
it hurt.
I almost threw up.
It hurt.
I think that's what's going on here. You have this selective amnesia. And at the end of the day, Jamal, when you work as a journalist and you make a certain amount of money, it's just human nature. You grow a little detached from reality. You start forgetting who your real enemies are. You start forgetting who's really responsible for the misery in the country because you don't think the country is miserable because you personally have it good. That's what happens at CNN.
Or Keith Olbermann is just a Democrat and that Bush was in office. And so he could be opposition because Bush was in office and Bush was fighting a war. I think it's Keith Olbermann is just a Democrat. I think when the times changed, Keith Olbermann ended up on the other side of this with Trump in office. And now all of a sudden he's upset at Donald Trump. So he forgives the things that Obama has done. And he just says, oh my God, George Bush wasn't as bad as I thought he was because he hates Donald Trump. I honestly think he's just opposition to whatever Republican Party is, or I'm saying this poorly. He's just opposition. If Keith Olbermann needs to take, at least I hope that's what it is. I loved Keith Olbermann, and it hurt me to my heart when I saw him on The View apologize for Bush. Yeah, it hurt. When you said it's. I laughed when you first said it. It pained me, but I realized it was yeah, you're right. It hurt. Keith Olbermann was part of my political awakening. I love the guy. If anybody looks at those old tapes of Keith Olbermann going after George Bush, just out of the blue, he was the first one to do it. Like these long diatribes, they were going for eight minutes with him just bashing George Bush, and you're like, yes, this guy's right. Yes, this guy's right. And then Obama comes in office, picks up Bush's wars, and Keith Olbermann shuts the fuck up.
Shuts and up. Also, you had mentioned Ed Schultz.
Yeah.
So when Keith Olbermann left, they had originally put Lawrence O'Donnell in to replace Keith O'Donnell. Keith Olbermann. Lawrence O'Donnell, I don't enjoy watching him, but the ratings weren't great. They switched Ed Schultz to 8 o'clock. Ed Schultz has terrific ratings, but he's talking about unions too much. He's and talking
TPP. Yeah.
So they moved it. They took their highest rated guy out of 8 o'clock. They moved him to 5 o'clock. And then after he ranted against the TPP and was pro Bernie, gone. So it's very clear. And, you know, honestly, that's part of what I want to do with my hopefully new network that I launch soon. I'm going to cover these stories, but we're also going to expose the corporate media, because at the end of the day, more people need to know the truth. They're not experiencing journalism. They're experiencing public relations for corporate America and the government. That's what MSNBC is. That's what the New York Times is. You know, I give credit to some of these journalists because whether I like their work or not, they do, you know, go to dangerous places. And I've seen it, you know. But at the end of the day, if you're just regurgitating and being a stenographer for what the CIA tells you or the president tells you or your sources in administrations tell you, you're not a journalist. You're a puppet, and you're part of the problem. So I think there needs to be a lot more journalism, and I think it's super important, whether it's me, Jimmy, you, Kyle Kalinske, if people, you know, I'm not going to attack TYT. If people still want to watch them, like, support independent media, because this is part of the progressive movement. This is what's awakening so many people that are going to these marches, that are going to protest, that are running for office. Voices like Jimmy Dore, voices like you, voices like Kyle. I've seen it on the road. I mean, I had a lot of people come up to me. I'll never forget this at Standing Rock, telling me, like, I got in my car after I saw one of your videos. And like, if you could have that kind of impact in your life or your career, that's amazing. I mean, I don't need a lot of money, but if I could do that, if anything, any video or report I do could inspire someone to act, then that's what I want to do. And I think we need a lot more of that.
Agreed. Yeah. And I try to often make this point that I consider TYT in my sandbox. I may hit them because I don't necessarily like what they're doing, but that's purely because they're slightly out of alignment with my value system in regards to what I think they should be doing. I think they're a weapon, though. I think they can be used as an amazing weapon. It's just right now, I think they're somewhat off kilter with this Democrat stuff. It's like I always ask the question, if Joe Manchin loses, are they going to tell people to support Joe Manchin in order to prevent a Republican from getting in office? I don't know the answer to that. And the fact that I don't know the answer to that bothers me.
Yeah. I always say, listen, people should watch what they want to watch. If they don't feel they're getting what they want, or they're not learning something new, or they're not getting the honest truth from TYT or you or me, yeah.
Yeah.
Do what you got to do.
So last question. What if I haven't asked, and I get this from Tim Black, because when I think he interviewed me, he asked me this, and I realized, I was like, hey, that's an awesome question. If there's something that I haven't asked that you want to get across to the audience, what would it be?
Obviously,
it's like, damn, that's not a straight question. Requires,
I'm kind of a always address the elephant in the room kind of person. Yeah. Life has its ups and downs. Obviously, in November and December was a dark time for me. What bothers me the most, honestly, was not losing my job. That sucks, but it happens. You get up again and figure out your life. But what bothers me the most is, as a man who is, raised by a pretty overbearing Jewish mother who, hold the door for a woman and put women on a pedestal and all these things, to have my name associated with something that's vile and probably the worst thing you could do as a man. Yeah. When it's not true, it to this day, it really upsets me, because besides it's not being true, it's just not who I am as a person. It's not how I was raised. I would never do that. And broader than that, I think people, whether it's about, me or anything else, when people are accused of something, whether it's financial or physical or whatever it is, I think too often in this 24/7 news / social media cycle, it's become kind of this game of digital telephone where something starts out in corner A of the internet and quickly moves to corner B, and within 20 minutes you're trending and you're guilty of something.
Yeah.
And that's not just for pity. That's just what I've seen. I've seen it not just with Me Too occasionally, but people getting accused of financial things, people getting accused of doing bad things that they weren't even there at the time. That
Yeah, it doesn't matter what it is. I mean,
and too often there's been this kind of herd mentality that people, instead of waiting for facts and looking at every side, they kind of just believe what they're predisposed to believe, I guess.
Yeah.
So the only thing I want the audience to know is, I could take criticism if you don't like my work, if you think I'm whatever, that's fine. But I just want people to know that what was accused of me is not true. And to this day, it bothers me because it's not true. And I'm happy at the point I'm at now because I have a kind of a new lease on life as far as my career. Like, we have the Patreon is growing, the YouTube is growing. I'm finally, to be honest with you, this was kind of my game plan down the road, even if I was at TYT still. But I just want people to be clear that is not true. And, I do have my faults. I've learned a lot from this experience. But those are my cards.
cool.
So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
No, man, I appreciate you coming on the show. I've always liked your work, and I've always thought you were an amazing journalist. I guess I've always taken it as I listen to both sides of it because I listen when all of this came up. I thought to myself, I was like, well, what's true in this? Like, it's one thing for them to say, okay, the splashy headline, but what's true? What do we actually know? And soon, the moment that you delve into it and you listen to everyone's side, it's like, this sounds sketchy. It sounds sketchy. And then you get into this thing of people who were, I don't know what to call them, and I don't want to make downplay the other side, but you had some people who weren't there, had nothing to do with it, who all of a sudden jumped on, oh my God, this woman is right. And if anybody says anything supporting Jordan, then you're a horrible man. And you're like, what? Like, it's like, how do you know? You weren't there. You had nothing to do with it. Why are you automatically assuming that what she said is right? Not to go into it. I was just blown away. Put it this way. It was mind-blowing that it got out to be the way that it is. And you had people take a particular side, even though they didn't necessarily know the information on the sides, and they took their hard sides. I don't want to feel like I took a particular side. I guess I looked at it as I like the guy, and I don't necessarily see what they're saying about the guy as being true. Clearly, they haven't established what they were saying. I heard her case, I heard his case, I heard everybody around it, and none of this sounded like what they were saying to be true. That's good. That's the way I came away from it. So I wish you the best. I want that media channel to do gangbusters. I want you to have that media revolution cool as that you're trying to have. Jordan Chariton, formerly of TYT, now having his own network, and the author of Corporate Con Job. Thank you, Jordan, very much. Man. All right, guys, I'm going to end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support through Patreon. This video is going to be up on my live site within probably the next 5 minutes. So you guys can see it there. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks, guys.